Okay, picture this. You're in the final parts of a game. The final boss and the end of the game are right there, waiting for you. You go through the level, only to come across a boss you fought earlier in the game. Okay, why? You beat him or her and move on, only to come across another boss fight you fought earlier. And another. And another. And another. And another. And welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen! I'll be your tour guide for the video. It's no secret that I love boss fights, but one aspect of boss fights that I actually don't like are boss rushes. To be more specific, boss rushes that are mandatory to beat a game. To me, this just seems like a complete waste of time. If anything, it only adds anywhere from a few minutes to maybe an hour depending on individual skill level. We really need to find a way to justify the price and time it took to make the game, eh, developers? You could just add something new, or, I don't know, not make us fight all the bosses again? It's not exactly lazy, but it feels lazy. When you're so close to the end, but then you just have that one level, it's just like, hey, replay the whole game again! It's like being right next to the finish line, then seeing that finish line move right as you approach it. It is irritating as all hell. Now, I do know the reasons why these were in certain games, at least in the early days of video games. Yeah, it was used to pad out time and justify the price of the game and the time it took to make the game, which I just mentioned not long ago. But in gaming's infancy, I suppose it made some sense. Gaming was still finding its footing and figuring out the formula, so I suppose it made sense to find out any way you could make the game experience last longer. Plus, since these boss fights just reuse the exact same assets, it's saved on development time to focus on any other areas of the game that still needed to be finished or polished up while adding content to the game by just repeating certain aspects of it, like boss fights. Nowadays though, unless it is done solely for the sake of nostalgia and keeping in line with the franchise, it just seems like a dick move to have a boss rush that we need to do to beat the game. They aren't as prevalent as they used to be, but when they do manage to pop up every now and again, I hate them every time. Besides me just complaining about my time, or me sounding like a whiny know-it-all about an industry that, while I am knowledgeable about, have no actual experience in, and still complain like I do.
Come on, game designers, get with it.
Kinda like that. There are a couple other reasons why I don't like them, although I will preface that they do kind of build on the waste of time and reusing assets complaints, but these are still their own issues. There is a supposed in-game justification for why these are a thing. It's used to show how far you've come on your journey. Hey, remember this boss you fought earlier and really struggled against? Look how far you've come now that you're facing him in the endgame. It's a nice use of showing how far you've come in the game and how you have made actual progress, since you know the boss's patterns now and you have better tools and skills to best them better than previous attempts. But while that may seem to be the intention, a lot of time is just to hide the fact that it's reusing assets and padding game time. Not to mention, most of the time, it might make no sense plot-wise as to why you're fighting the exact same bosses again. Like, for example, in Mega Man, when you beat the Robot Masters, they are completely destroyed. So when they appear later on, what's the implication? Did Wily waste his time and resources recreating the exact same robots with the exact same patterns and the exact same weaknesses each and every game? It doesn't make much sense in universe-wise. Okay, so it's an old game, maybe they didn't need to think of the logistics of it. So how about a more recent game? Devil May Cry 4. Not only do you fight majority of the bosses as Nero, but then finish them off as Dante. Yeah, you finish them off. So, why are they still around? Not only that, but they are in the same area with the same patterns and difficulty and movesets. There is no point. Especially egregious in this game since they already ran out of time and money before really implementing Dante's campaign, so why even bother with a boss rush this time around? At this point, yeah, I've been saying the same thing over and over for the past few minutes, but all my points still stand. Boss rushes that are mandatory suck, and I'm very glad they're not so much a thing anymore. Now, what about other examples that may seem like boss rushes, but actually aren't, or are optional boss rushes? Well, I'm glad you asked. You didn't? Too bad. I'm going over anyway. I'm totally fine with optional boss rushes. If it's a side mode or something optional, then I have no problem with it. It does offer a nice challenge, and in some cases like Kirby, some bosses can only be found in the boss rush. Not only does it give you a reason to do said boss rush, but it is not needed to finish the base game. It can offer a nice bonus challenge for those willing. I am also 100% fine with having the ability to refight bosses. Some bosses in games are fantastic, but sometimes having to create a separate save slot to fight said boss again can be annoying. So maybe offer a way of fighting bosses again in some kind of mode or something. I would be totally fine with that. If we go back to mandatory bosses, if I do need to refight a boss for any reason, 1, don't have it be tons of bosses in a row, and 2, vary them up in some way. New moves, new area to fight, just something new. Speaking of varying bosses, I am fine with recurring bosses as well. Recurring bosses are not mandatory boss rushes, but they are bosses that you faced once before, but you also face them more times after that initial fight. By that logic, I should hate them, right? Well, no, not usually. If done right, recurring bosses are really fun and really do show how far you've come, but also provides a challenge by having the boss either having new techniques from their own off-screen journey, or just new techniques you've never seen in the previous fight. It is both a good storytelling technique, showing how far you have to go, your improvement, and how far you've come, while providing a good challenge against an enemy that you grow an attachment to. And by attachment, I mean a boss you can't wait to bust your teeth in every time. With recurring bosses, while you do fight them multiple times, they aren't usually one after the other, and you get plenty of breather time and other parts of the game to play before any rematches. However, if you have multiple recurring bosses, then you run into a similar problem, where while you aren't facing them one after the other, you're facing the same bosses over and over again, possibly with little to no variation, since games can only hold so many gigabytes. Even though this is scripted, I feel like I'm just rambling at this point. Okay, moving on then. One thing I have to point out is that there's a difference between boss rushes and boss-based games. Boss-based games are built entirely around the boss fights, as they're the only obstacles in the game. They may not have any enemies at all, or even level-based challenges, so the entire game is based around boss fights and their mechanics. You may face them one after another, but they are all unique and in varying locations with varying mechanics and challenges. If you had to face them all again right after you just beat them, that would be padding and annoying as hell. They may need to be fought to continue with the game, but that's all games period. Obstacles to be conquered to move on to the next. But imagine you beat a challenge to later on just have that exact same challenge again. If bosses are refought later in the game, it can't be in a row and there needs to be differences to justify the refight. By the way, boss fights with multiple phases or boss gauntlets aren't exactly boss rushes. The multiple phase thing should be self-explanatory, but the same boss with multiple phases is challenging and fun and presents a great cap-off to a game or a unique challenge. They can be annoying, but usually are fun. A boss gauntlet, while looking the same as a boss rush on the surface, it's not exactly the same. Where they differ is that a boss gauntlet is like a boss rush that has all new and unique bosses that you haven't faced before, and they can be in a row, which is a bit of a pain, but since it's a new experience one after the other, it still works and it can be fun. They could be seen as similes and that boss gauntlets and boss rushes are the exact same thing, but to me, at least, they are different. Maybe a better word could be used, but I just want to get that point across. As long as boss rushes stay optional and are not needed to progress through a game, I will be a very happy Adam. I am totally fine with optional boss rushes. If it is a side mode or something optional, then I have no problem with it. It does not only give you... Wait, it does not... oh, shit. I can't read. Here's a little background information. When I do bloopers, it's usually the clips I find funny or just relatable in some way, and keep those. Kind of like now, like just me talking about this, just you know, a little something. But there have been so many times where I just mess up and cut it out and mess up and cut it out, and I'm pretty sure that would get annoying if I did it each and every time. So, a little behind the scenes, just you know, I find the ones I find funny or relatable and keep those, and the rest of them it's more or less just me saying shit and fuck over and over and just not using the audio file. Okay, let's try this again, and hopefully I can read this time. It does offer a nice challenge, and in some cases like Kirby, some bosses can only be found in the boss rush. Not only does it give you a reason to do said boss rush, but it is not needed to finish the base game. It can offer... Okay. It is both a good story... Good storing. Ay, ay, ay. They may not have any enemies at all, or even level-based challenges, so the entire game is based around boss fights and their mechanics. You may face them one after another and in a row. That's redundant. What the f... Ay, ay, ay.